Welcome to Lamora's Cards and Horrors, best store for all your gaming and haunting needs. I'm Matthew. Today we're going to be talking about the Magic sets that have had the most influence on cEDH. But this is a little bit different of an episode because I'm joined by two guests today. And I'm really excited to get to talk to them about what they think this is. I'm going to have them introduce themselves now. Claire, would you like to go first?
Sure, yeah. I'm Claire. You may know me. I'm 1/3 of the content creation team for Who Brewed This. I also played in the Major League Commander League for 2022. It was a lot of fun. But yeah, I'm super excited to discuss this topic for sure.
Yeah, and this is kind of, I think it was Playing with Power or the Mind Sculptors. I think they had posted, and Claire and I kind of got into a discussion about two of the big suggestions.
No, it was the Monarch.
That's right, Monarch Media.
Account, yeah.
That's right. Yeah, they had posted asking about the most influential set, and Claire and I kind of got into a discussion about it, and then we were like, okay, there's a lot to talk about here beyond this.
Yeah,
so
for
we
sure.
made it a full podcast, and so that's how we're here. And also have Eric. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Eric Taylor. I'm returning guest, technically for the third time.
Yeah, like two and a half visits.
Just all things Magic. Pretty much nobody in the community. You won't know who I am. I think I have like 5 followers. But I recently did an episode about the Corporal deck. So probably where if you know anything, the small tidbit about me, that's where it's from.
Yep, and so we're going to go into it. So I think first we're going to go over what each of you think is the most influential set, just kind of briefly. We're not going to dive into them too much, and then we're going to go over some of the kind of honorable mentions, go through some of them, and then we'll dive into these sets that really I think have an argument for the most influence. So Claire, would you like to go first?
Sure, yeah. So in my opinion, and I still pretty much stand by this, I think that the most influential set for competitive EDH at the moment is almost assuredly Theros Beyond Death. And I know it doesn't have like necessarily the quantity of staples, but the two cards that I'm thinking of warp the format such that I can't think of any other cards that are more influential than those two. So with the kind of the double whammy of like the 1-2 punch of like how the cEDH meta has developed in like, especially in the post Flash era is, I mean, I think it's a pretty cut and dry case, and I have responses to arguments against. So, but we'll get into that, I'm sure.
Yeah, that's probably one of the big, I would say there's about 3 that most of the arguments around the posts were around. That's definitely one of the big ones. For, like you said, 2 very big reasons. Looking over the set, it actually has, I think, more than I expected that is good, but also like you said, those 2 big ones. We'll dive into those. Everyone already knows what we're talking about, but yeah. And Eric, what would you say?
It's really hard to disagree with that one because those two particular cards, as Claire said, we'll just dive into later, is just so powerful in the impact that they have on the format when you build those particular colors, if they're not already combined together, are kind of point A and point B of where you might want to start and look at, unless you're not playing a strategy that's conducive to one of those. Theros is such a powerful one, but to just think about some more topics, the commander set with first additional partner commanders with like Thrasios, Crom, all those, that would be another one that I would throw in there for contention of one of the most influential sets in terms of impact on the game, not necessarily quantity, though it does have quite a bit as well.
Yeah, that's Commander 2016. It introduced the partner commanders, not all of which still see play. I think just about every one of them was tested at some point in cEDH, and some get more play than others and more love than others. Timna's actually good, whereas like Tana gets played, but you just play Tana for the color. So there's like there's ups and downs.
I would say even more so than Tana, it's Silas Wren.
Yeah, that's just
Like,
bad.
Because people will, I've seen people like pull out pretty clutch wins, especially in like white-based stacks decks with Tana. But as soon as you do Silas Wren, it's just like, oh, I'm just taking you because you're Dimir. That's the only reason.
I think it's the ally colors that only got one of each, and then I think the enemy colors got two of each. So we haven't seen like another Dimir one, which is like generally speaking the best color pairing. And having another Dimir partner would be pretty, especially if it was actually good, unlike Silas Wren, which is very rarely actually goes with what a deck is trying to do. Sometimes you get more synergy than not, but yeah, generally not that great. So those are two of the biggest ones. Probably the third biggest one was Alpha, Beta, Unlimited, Revised as some of the biggest ones. Probably those three sets for most of the arguments for the most influential set. There are a couple other ones I wanted to touch on before we dive into those. Grab my list here. Some really fun, and this was just fun to research, like you were talking about. Like, it's such a big topic, and there's so many cards, and it also can be like the point of view you take. Kind of like when in any most influential discussion, you can look at like current day versus the full timeline of cEDH, because I think Commander 2016 has a much better argument if you look at the history of cEDH, because since then it has been.
I would totally agree with that statement. For that. Yeah, for sure.
But then I think two other, like Alpha, Beta, whatever. The original Magic set definitely has a big discussion there, because obviously we don't get Magic, we don't get cEDH. That's just kind of how it works. And then also Legends, not as powerful as a set, but if we don't get Legends, we don't get cEDH, obviously. So very influential in that regard. Some of the other big ones that had more than I expected. Commander 2019 has Dockside Extortionist, Savine's Reclamation, Elsha of the Infinite, Anja Falconwrath, Crick, Son of Yawgmoth, Atla Palani, and then not quite as good, but it sees play in some decks, Orin Frostfang as a big one. I mean, Dockside is, I think, in that same sphere of influence as like a Thassa's Oracle and Underworld Breach at this point.
That makes sense to me. Those particular sets seemed like Wizards was really flexing their like creative muscles on a lot of the legendary creatures, and they were really sort of increasing the individual power level, at least in my experience. So, and then Dockside really changed the game, to be honest.
Yeah. Dockside. Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Eric.
I was just gonna say that that's a really good, solid choice, because Dockside's just kind of one of the most powerful, not arguably the most powerful card in the game. It's like it's kind of all in there, that sphere of what it does. But one of those suggestions, and I was just looking at it, and Commander 20, like you said, Commander 2019, again, capitalizing more on partner commanders, along with a few other cards in there, like Jewel Lotus and whatnot. But one I want to throw in there in terms of just for discussion purposes, while not as directly single card impactful, was Modern Horizons 2.
And I got a big old list for, I have a big old list for Modern Horizons.
It's wild.
2. Yeah, it's...
Again... Oh, go ahead. I'm so sorry.
Oh no, you can go, and then I'll kind of list some of the. I went through a lot of these sets and listed what I considered as like impactful cEDH cards, and then gonna kind of go over them. But yeah, go ahead and talk about it.
Yeah, it was just such a wild set looking at it. And we talked upon it just in the last podcast that we did, and we're just discussing the one drops specifically.
Yeah.
And then when you really go through and look at the set, it is. Well, a modern set, it's just like a super commander set, and the way the card design are. And you don't even think about like a card like Ignoble Hierarch, for example. Yeah. It just seems very like, oh, it's a generically good card, but for the decks that play it, it really solves some problems that those decks needed in the one drop slot. And, you know, it happened to be a goblin, was pretty huge, but just little things and little nuance things like that. Tavern Scoundrel, we know how that card and Harmonic Prodigy has impacted the deck of cards.
This set, I actually listed some cards from that set that aren't really that widely played, but have been really influential for Krark specifically, which is
Krark
like, we can't ignore that.
You really can't. It did just win tier 1 con.
Yeah,
like.
exactly. Because like Strike It Rich, not really a widely played card, but when you can make like 5 treasures off of Strike It Rich, it becomes very good for 1 mana at that point.
I've made literally 20.
Yeah, exactly.
1 mana before. It's so great.
For Modern Horizons 2 specifically, I have Esper Sentinel, Yavimaya Cradle of Growth, Urza Saga, Dothi Voidwalker, Academy Manufactor, which not super widely played, but decks like Magda take advantage of it. Ragavan Nimble Pilferer, Sanctum Weaver, Ignoble Hierarch, Profane Tutor, which is mostly a Cody card, but it defines that deck really. Sithis Harvest Hand, Harmonic Prodigy, Dragon's Rage Channeler, Strike It Rich, Solitude, Endurance, Grist the Hunger Tide, Suspend, Dress Down, Tavern Scoundrel, and Lonus Cryptozoologist. Which is a pretty big list.
Lots of really good cards in there, and then like some niche cards as well. Like Lonus is a really interesting commander, and like Academy Manufacturer. Not even Magda, but like I don't know if you follow Just Kev's Will on Twitter, but he's a good friend of mine, he loves his Time Civ, and he's got like his Cecily and Sophina decks and his Tivit deck, and you know he's really breaking that card in half too. So definitely true that card really like opens up entire archetypes.
Yeah, it makes a good-ish thing and then a food, but just like tripling your artifact output is enough for decks like obviously KCI is a good card that can take advantage of that, or Time Civ, Magda, lots of cards that just care about raw
artifact count, just putting permanence into play,
and some other, just a couple of cards in there too, like Unmarked Grave, you know, Entomb is such a powerful ability. Obviously, that card is a little bit watered down version, but just seeing like an ability to put a Hulk in the graveyard is, you know, just really powerful on its own, or just setting something up, helping like the Mizzix Mastery style red Turbo Nas builds, like just become a little bit more fluid. And again, putting a Dockside in the graveyard, reanimating is always a great one. And just something as simple as Damn. Just having a spot removal that, like, you know, parries over into a mass removal spell. Again, not necessarily like a super wide played card, but just such a good card overall that it has multiple applications. Again, just showing how the set really was broad all over across.
Yeah, I think Unmarked Grave is a good point too, because not only just Dockside, but like even in Sans Red 4-color Thrasios decks, like TNT Reanimator, your Razakats, they like completely went off of like your Jin-Gitaxias, which was often like a tertiary hit, and they switched to like Consecrated Sphinx so that they could resurrect that after loading up the graveyard with Unmarked Grave. So while that isn't really the case anymore, I think those decks are leaning more towards Abdel Adrian now, but you know, it can definitely, just adding another tutor can definitely shift how a deck is constructed for sure.
I think we also got Persist in that same set, which can kind of work with that same thing, kind of the other side of it. Another big one, not in card count, but in just terms of cards that see play, was Commander 2020, where we got Fierce Guardianship.
Free spells, right? Yeah, the free
Fierce
spells.
Guardianship, Deflecting Swat, Deadly Rollick. The other ones don't really see play, but those ones too. Is it Tyam or Tam? I don't know how to pronounce it. Tyam, Luminous Enigma. It's an Abzan commander that sees a decent amount of play. Braylon and Shabraz, Okima Kazur, Calamax of Stormsire, Paco and Halden, and Surly Badgersaur, which sees some play in some discard lists.
Always wanted to make that Badgersaur work.
Yeah,
and like
there are decks that take advantage of it. That one is mostly like, it's surprising amount of viable command with like 5. I'm pretty sure all 5 of those are on the database currently. And then 3 really widely played cards. Deadly Rollick seeing a little bit less play, but Deflecting Swat and Fierce Guardianship being like auto includes for the format.
Deflecting Swap might be like one of the best counter spells in Commander at the moment, I think. I know it's not a counter spell, but it just functionally serves as like one of the best in the format.
Yeah, I can agree with that, especially too it not being blue either, so it doesn't have the ability to get like Reb or Pyroblasted back. Kind of actually protects it, and the fact that Live the Dream, Deflecting Swat appear into the Abyss just feels really good.
It's really flexible.
You do that once, you swat a PETA once, and it's just like, I'm addicted to whatever this feeling is.
Yeah, I'm good. I don't even care what my PETA gets me. I won the game, right?
I even had a game where I had to hard cast my Deflecting Swat into a Pyramid of the Abyss, and it's still like 3 mana worth it. Every day of the week, just paying 3 mana to get a Pyramid of the Abyss at instant speed and stop someone from getting a Pyramid of the Abyss. It's so good.
It's so good. Yeah.
And it's just an easy way to like 2 for like someone goes to remove your thing, you save your thing and remove their thing. That is such good value for 0 mana a lot of the times. Incredible value. Not quite as big as Modern Horizons 2, but Modern Horizons 1 I also think was a pretty big set for CEDH.
To be honest, that set got me into cEDH.
Yeah, it really defined. There's a lot of like defining cards here. Namely, we've got Sisay Weatherlight Captain, Urza Lord High Artificer, the First Sliver, and Yawgmoth Rampant Physician, which is 4 pretty highly played cards in their colors. The first Sliver was like, I think, hotter when it came out than it is now at this point. But
let me tell you, as someone who drafted the First Sliver in the MLC, I just hate Food Chain.
Yeah.
Like having
it's fallen out of favor a bit.
Having 3 to 5 slots in your deck that are just like, this is a Food Chain card. It feels so bad when you draw them.
I keep trying to tell the Corval Discord about like take Food Chain out of your Corval deck, and they're just like, oh, it's so resilient. I'm like, there's nothing resilient about this combo. It was good at the time when that was the thing to do, and that was all you had. But there's just so many other like abilities to like make the deck smoother, leaner, less reliable on Squee,
and it just it folds to Drannith too, which is the big thing. And Drannith is everywhere.
It sort of attacks things from a different, but not it's a different angle, but it isn't an angle that avoids what other people are doing. Like you're running kind of bad cards for like a turbo list, and you still are hit just as hard by rule of law effects. So you kind of just get screwed on all accounts.
Like if you want to run a creature combo to like get around like the negates of the format, that's respectable. But like do it in a way that's not going to get punished when they counter your Food Chain or they shut off your ability to cast multiple spells per turn, or if they keep you from casting things from exile. Yeah.
We also got Prismatic Vista, Force of Negation, Generous Gift, which sees play mostly in mono white decks, but it sees a little bit of play. Force of Vigor, Ephemerate, Goblin Engineer, Tribute Mage, Collector Oof, Ranger Captain of Eos, Winds of Abandon, and Giver of Runes. With Collector Oof and Ranger Captain, I think being 2 of the most impactful creatures in the game currently.
I will say oof changed the way that I say oof when people like mess up. I definitely spell O-U-P-H-E.
Yeah, and then Force of Negation, obviously pretty good here. And Force of Vigor in the decks that need it can be just really, like, you're so willing to get rid of, like, a Rule of Law and whatever, an Esper Sentinel or something. Just about any 2 things that can get hit by it, you're usually okay hitting them. And it comes out pretty good. But, and then 2 pretty powerful tutors. Tribute Mage sees a bit of play in Goblin Engineer. They both kind of see play for the same reasons, but they're both pretty useful in the decks that needs them. Winds of Abandon could probably see more play in a Krark-centric world.
Yeah.
And then Ephemerate, mostly used for Spellseeker lines. but pretty powerful in the decks that do that. It's basically with Spellseeker, it turns Spellseeker into a 1-card win con in like Jeskai list.
Yeah, that's just by mentioning some of those cards. Like obviously, like I play with these cards all the time, and then I just kind of forget like what set they're from. Especially like I don't think I can cut on a cEDH like content without watching a Ranger Captain of EOs come down and just like
it changes
change the texture of the game.
Yeah.
Getting his buddy Esper Sentinel.
Yeah, and
know?
it gets you. You literally get the Modern Horizons 1 into Modern Horizons 2 combo from Ranger Captain grabbing Esper Sentinel.
Well, we get Modern Horizons 3. It'll just be
Exactly.
another white draw effect, card advantage effect. That'll just keep on going. Keep the trend
White
rolling.
is really getting there. And this one,
And Tribute Mage, sorry,
Oh,
I
go
just want to like give Tribute Mage a little bit of love. It's seen a little bit more play, mostly because of the Tivit and the Time Sieve. So
yeah.
being able to actively tutor for Time Sieve in the color is pretty nice to have for just low cost on that regard. So
For sure.
And I had sort of joked. So when Claire and I had first discussed what set was most influential, I had kind of made a joke remark because something had come up about Throne of Eldraine with Kenrith, and I was like, "Oh, Throne of Eldraine most influential." So I looked up Throne of Eldraine. It has a much better argument than I actually realized. Having obviously Kenrith the Return King, Corvold the Fakehurst King, Hullen Teller of Tales, Emery Lurker of the Loch, Arcane Signet, Mystic Sanctuary, Return of the Wild Speaker, The Great Hinge, Wishclaw Talisman, Castle Garenbrig, Fey Burrow Elder, Drown in the Loch, Oko, Deafening Silence, Okame Adversary, Hushbringer, Stonecoil Serpent, and Corridor Monitor.
not too bad.
Yeah, no, definitely not bad.
Yeah, Arcane Signet specifically being one of the more widely played cards in the format. Kenrith potentially being like a top whatever commander, pretty highly regarded. Corvold, me and Eric just really like. Pretty good too, but
he's fun. I love a good Corvold game. It's always fun to like dumpster someone on turn 2 with a ton of treasures.
I like how there are like 3 pretty unique commanders here with Corvold, Hullen, and Emery, and then just Kenrith, the most generic commander to ever exist.
Yeah. Well, like I was saying in the conversation
Yeah.
we were having, if you got rid of partners, every deck would be a King Kenrith deck, in my opinion. Or all of these like 4-color soups would just go to 5-color and play Kenrith.
Yeah, probably. I think you could see more people turn to like some of the 3-color ones we've listed here, and there's I think a few more I go over, but yeah, generally speaking, you'd also get a lot more Kess lists, I feel like, just like pure Grixis decks.
Deafening Silence being, I mean, that card's for 1 mana. That card is so impactful on a game. And then the decks that really utilize it, especially like the green mid-range style X decks, they can still utilize it and win under it, which is also kind of powerful too, especially if they're a creature-based deck.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really hold them back nearly as much. And just being able to like sprinkle just a few stacks effects that don't really affect you, that for 1 mana, that's really, really hard to turn down. So that card's pretty powerful for an uncommon.
A shell like Rocco loves that.
Yeah.
For sure.
I think this was also not really in cEDH, but in like standard modern. This is the set where a lot of people started complaining about green. With this and the 1-2 punch wore the spark into this. And it looks like
it was the same time with Veil Summer.
And it looks like with this set, like looking at this is a super green list of cards. It is actually pretty powerful, like a pretty empowering green list. It's pretty wild.
Notable, not on this list. Oko, Thief of Crowns.
Oh, I had Oko.
Oh, you did? Okay,
I don't think I said the Thief of Crowns. My bad.
Oh,
But
no, you're good.
Switch drop Oko, right? You know?
I don't think he's... I don't think Oko is particularly good in cEDH, for what it's worth. It's fine. Like, I think it's a justifiable inclusion, but I just don't really see it against 3 opponents getting the same sort of value and becoming the same sort of problem it was in a lot of 1v1 formats.
Yeah, I had checked cEDH.guide for some of the stats. It is one of the most, it's like top 5 most played Planeswalkers, but it's like tied for second with like 4 other Planeswalkers and being in 2 lists. Generally
Yeah.
speaking, for a planeswalker, Oko's pretty powerful for cEDH, but we don't. That's because we don't have a lot of non-commander planeswalkers that really see much play.
What was number 1 for that? I'm curious.
Narset.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. That effect is so much
3 decks.
better.
With 3 decks. These are a couple that don't have a lot of cards, but are pretty powerful. Mirage has Mystical Tutor, Enlightened Tutor, Worldly Tutor, Lion's Eye Diamond, Crystal Vein, Cursed Totem, Final Fortune, Wall of Roots, Polymorph, and Phyrexian Dreadnought. Probably there are a couple sets I think that meet this. This is probably the smallest set that has cards in it you will see in almost every single game.
A lot of fast mana for sure. Although I think I personally think that Lion's Eye Diamond is only strengthens the case for Theros Beyond Death, but we can get to that later.
Yeah, that's the I looked a lot into those stats, and like the cards, Underworld Breach and Lion's Eye Diamond are so closely together in the stats. It's kind of like you can't really separate them. Because if you're running one, if you can run Underworld Breach, you should run Lion's Eye Diamond, essentially.
There is a case in Quark Sakashima for not running it, but and you just run Breach for consistency. But even then, a lot of people do run LED in their Quark lists, so it's hard to say for sure.
And then Urza Saga with Windfall, Phyrexian Tower, Gamble, Exploration, which is a little iffy, but it sees play at points. Carpet of Flowers, Gaia's Cradle, Priest of Titania, Gilded Drake, Yawgmoth's Will, Back to Basics, Reign of Filth, and Serra Sanctum. Just a pretty OP time in Magic's history, really. Obviously, if without bans, Tolarian Academy would be on this list as well. Probably that would really strengthen this one as the most for no ban list EDH at least.
Yeah, and Bargain would probably be on there as well.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Is that from Saga or is that from Destiny? Can't remember Legacy.
It might be from one of the other two. I was looking at it with like EDH rec stats, so like the ban cards end up like plummeting. I did specifically account for. So this next set has a ban list card that I will account for because it didn't get banned immediately, and that's Commander Legends. We had Arami of the Dead Tide, Nimrus Una's Trickster, Arden Intrepid Archaeologist, Armix Filigree Thrasher, Dargo the Shipwrecker, Jessica Thrice Reborn, Kamal Heart of Krosa, Kadama the East Tree, Krark the Thumbless, Malcolm Keen-Eyed Navigator, Rograk or Roger, Sakashima, Tevesh Zat, Doom of Fools. We had the 5, the new Battle Bond lands. We finished the cycle there, so we had those 5 cards. Jessica's Will, Jeweled Lotus, Opposition Agent, Wheel of Misfortune, and of course, Hull Breacher, which was banned.
If we were having this conversation in the middle of Hull Breacher not being banned, I really think that you could make a case for Commander Legends 1 being the most influential set.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can agree with that one for sure.
And I think it still has an I don't think it could really win the argument for most influential set currently, but I think it still has one. A lot of the these partner commanders have generally like a lot more of an identity that puts you in a certain direction. Cards like Malcolm, for example, like really define an entire deck. Krark the Thumbless and Sakashima, obviously pretty influential. Just one tier 1 con. Is the source.
But even Sakashima and Kodama, like just getting 2 of whatever broken effect you can is often like enough to create an engine that's just out of control.
I think if
Timnas, same thing.
Yeah.
Sakashima and Timna, just another example of Sakashima being a really great value piece in there.
People have called for Krark to be banned, but really it would definitely be Sakashima that you should ban because it's way more of an enabler. I don't think either of them should be banned, obviously, but just people like complain. And like Sakashima though is clearly the card that
Yeah, it's the cause. It is
does
the
it.
reason that it's frustrating. Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Yeah, I was actually surprised with the amount how this is like mostly a commander list and not there are only the 5 lands and then 5 other cards that aren't commanders from this list. I actually don't think Commander Legends is quite as powerful as some people say looking at that. Although Jessica's Will, Jeweled Lotus, Hull Breacher, I mean that's a pretty good argument, but just for those 3 broken cards. But I think overall the set was like actually a lot more middle of the range than some people might remember.
I think that the biggest argument for it being very influential is Jeweled Lotus and what that did for low color identity commanders.
Yeah.
Because pre Commander Legends 1, it definitely felt like the format was in a place where if you weren't in at least 3 colors, you weren't really doing much of anything. Like that was right after, if I remember correctly, Dockside had been printed, and there was like everyone was on Opus Thief at the time, and if I'm remembering this correctly, and
I think this would have been after Commander 2020. Because this was after Ikoria.
Yeah.
But yeah, everyone's running Dockside. This was the year I think Flash gets banned, or is that 2019? I think this is the year it gets banned.
It was definitely around this time, I believe. Yeah, it was all kind of happening in a blur.
Yeah, COVID's going on. Nobody knows what's happening.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think Jeweled Lotus is big, and also just Jeweled Lotus helps lower colors, and then the access to 1 color partners. I think that especially that push people in more of a direction like Jessica, Tevish, and Malcolm specifically, and Dargo.
Rogue Rack too.
And yeah, like we get, which was a meme when it came out and was not a meme for very long because decks like Roger Silas became like really scary right after this.
I remember being so angry that Roger Silas was the better deck than like a Tevesh Crom, because like Tevesh Crom, it just kind of makes sense. It's like, yeah, both of these are very powerful card advantage engines, and it's like, nope, I'm gonna sacrifice the Cobalt to my Culling the Weak, and I'm gonna win the game. So it happens.
And it's that's a list that it empowers card like what we talked about. This same year is when Deflecting Spot, Fierce Guardianship, Deadly Rollick came out. You play a Roger, you have access to all 3 of those cards. Turn 1. It's it was. There's definitely a lot of compounding stuff in that year that kind of layered on top of each other to make the stuff that we look at now.
Yeah, so I was gonna say with the Commander Legends, the one thing it did was it kind of opened the format up. Instead of like these 4-color soup decks, we got some of the more the 3-color partner ones. And I feel like first you look and you identified like some of the commanders, like obviously this is a really good commander. So you look at like at first you kind of like some people thought Tevish was too slow, but then in practice when you play Tevish, it's completely different. Same thing with Jessica, like just the way Jessica can like affect a game, especially like in regards to maybe like Ishai. So how it can essentially whether one-shot somebody with an Ishai or it can clear the board. It kind of helped open the format up in a little different way. And this is more so after Hull Breacher, but like Armix seeing play. At first, you look at Armix and go, it's okay. But then you play Armix in the right meta, especially if there's a lot of Collector Oof style things, it just eats those decks up.
Yeah.
So it's really, really neat to see the impact of the set overall, the normal powerful cards that it had, and just kind of the overall middle of the road commanders that helped solve some problems while still playing like really powerful color identities in 3 colors.
Yep. Yeah, I think to me, it was a set that a lot of people expected to ruin Commander by making it more homogenous, and I think it opened up the format probably more than any other individual set has.
Yeah, I liked it. It was really fun. I mean, I wish Hull Breacher was in red, but teach their own, I guess.
Still kind of a weird card for blue. I think could have been white. Of course, like all the good stuff. So we're coming into sort of the main, the sets that have, I think, the best arguments. So we'll go with the probably the elephant in the room, the ancient Greek elephant in the room with Theros
Prophecy,
Beyond Death.
right?
Yes, prophecy.
It's prophecy, right?
Now Theros Beyond Death, from what I could looking over the list, we got about 6 cards that I think have really impacted cEDH with Thassa's Oracle, Underworld Breach, Destiny Spinner, Heliod Suncrowned, Alseed of Life's Bounty, and Croxa, Titan of Death's Hunger. 2 of those cards. Oh, go ahead.
I think Stern Dismissal deserves a slot in there as well.
Okay.
Just a 1-mana bounce spell can be particularly good. Not that it sees a ton of play.
Yeah.
But it is definitely slot in for certain metas, and it is an effective interaction piece in my experience.
Yeah. Oh, I forgot. Oh, real quickly, I did want to mention, I was looking through Modern Horizons 1, and also that is definitely the set that made Yuriko what she is now, because there were like 20 Yuriko staples in that set. If I had included all the Yuriko cards, it would have been like an extra 10 into Modern Horizons 1, and it probably would have had the most cards on the list just because of Yuriko, because it had like 2 changelings and then like 8 ninjas, and they all see play in every single Yuriko list.
Yeah, and just 2 other cards that aren't insanely, they're not staples, but they do see play, are like Heliod's Intervention and like Wave Break Hippocamp.
Yeah.
These play in like those style of decks. So just again, just a more utility style cards that set had that actually lets you kind of know that, oh, there's a little bit more than you originally thought outside of the first big 2.
Yeah, I think there's probably between like, there's probably around 10-ish. It definitely doesn't have the biggest. But it's like we mentioned, Thassa's Oracle, Underworld Breach. You are very unlikely to play a game of cEDH where these cards don't either win the game or try to win the game.
Well, even if you are not playing against them, I think they make their presence known in deck building. So it's not even that you... Because this is really what I kind of define as like what makes something influential, and it's like a lot of these sets are going to have a ton of fast mana, and they're going to have a ton of tutors, and they're going to have a ton of free interaction, they're going to have a ton of these value pieces, and maybe they have these commanders that make these archetypes. But when we're talking about like what is the thing that people are adjusting their decks to fight around.
Yeah.
For instance, like as soon as you see Thoracle, like you start to see Cephalid Coliseum show up in decks. You start to see these cards that force card draw. It definitely, it changes kind of the environment in which people are constructing their decks, in my opinion. Same with Breach. Like Lion's Eye Diamond is good, right? It's a good card. You can always diamond in response to casting a tutor, and that was fine. But really what shattered Lion's Eye Diamond as a card is just Underworld Breach.
Yeah.
Like that they go together so perfectly, because as soon as that breach lands, it doesn't matter what you discard. You're still going to have access to it, and it's just going to fuel the things that you're trying to do further. It makes things like, Brain Freeze better. And just all of these includes that people are kind of constructing their decks around either to take advantage of or to fight these things. I think really solidifies it, because like, if you look at like partners and, tutors or fast mana, it's all of that's pretty easily replaceable. But if you get rid of Underworld Breach and Thoracle, you end up changing the way people are constructing decks in a much greater way, in my opinion, than anything else. And that's really what kind of puts it over the top for me personally.
I do think, real quickly, I do think it's a little hard to, because I think it's a little harder to imagine what a like fast mana list cEDH looks like, because I think then what becomes viable, I think, shifts dramatically more than just like everybody gets slowed down a little bit. It's also like everybody gets slowed down to someone else's level to an extent, and I think that could shape the format in a way that would be really hard to predict now. But if like they ban all the fast mana, and then for 2 years we're trying to figure out the meta. I think what we're playing could be drastically different than what we play now.
It would make green.
Yeah, that's one thing. Green
Absolutely
suddenly
necessary.
becomes very good. Yasharn, best deck in the format? Question mark. Yasharn, Rurik, Thar meta. Yeah. So I think that's definitely 100%. And just in the regards of like when you play Underworld Breach, suddenly a lot of cards start to make a lot more sense. Wheels, which are a lot of people would argue not very good, they become a lot better for you. You can combo, especially with you get LED, Wheel of Fortune, Underworld Breach, which according to cEDH.guide, the most common combo in the format is not Thassa's Oracle Demonic Consultation. It is Wheel of Fortune, Underworld Breach as the most popular combo index.
Well, and I think too, you can make the argument that like the only reason something like Endurance sees as much play as it does is because it's directly related to Underworld Breach's popularity. Like,
and
sure, you may,
both of those cards.
Exactly, yeah.
And then you also change deck construction because, which I wasn't really as into cEDH when like Labman was the other, that was our the Thassa's Oracle back in the day. But you also run Demonic Consultation because of Thassa's Oracle, and that changes mana bases. Or no, Tainted Pact. Tainted Pact changes. It changes the mana bases, which was already kind of a thing. Like Food Chain lists were on it, and some Labman lists. But now it's just like people who aren't on Thassa. I mean, you can look at Eric's Corvold list. You run a Tainted Pact and our Tainted Pact mana base in Corvold a lot of times just because you can get a Thassa's Oracle with Praetor's Grasp. I mean, that card sees play primarily because of Thassa's Oracle.
I was going to say Praetor's Grasp primarily sees play too because of Underworld Breach. Because if you can't multiple Praetor's Grasp, you can't like generate a bunch of mana and then steal an A+B combo from someone else's deck. And that... Like, I don't think you would see as much Praetor's Grasp play at all if Underworld Breach were to be banned. Like, I still think it'd show up, but not nearly in the numbers that it is.
Yeah, I can agree with that 100%. I mean, just when you look at those two particular cards, and both being 2 mana is pretty wild on top of it. I played Standard when Yawgmoth's Will was legal. So if that lets you know how old I am. So I was playing Standard then, and that card was extremely powerful in a 20 life format, with creatures like hyper effective, like small creatures and stuff could attack you and everything, and like mono green Stompy and whatnot. And then there was obviously the Tolarian Academy list, and then there was variation of like Burn and Sly and Ponza and whatnot, and Wildfire, Covetous Dragon decks, but Will was so good, and then when a card came out that fundamentally is better and it's less mana, it's pretty wild. Like, I didn't think that was ever going to be a thing. So I always ask people, because think about how much Yawgmoth's Will is worth today. And this is a really weird, little thought experiment. Imagine if Breach was printed in Urza's Saga, or whatever Urza said it was. Yeah. So we'll say Urza's Destiny.
It was Saga for Yawgmoth's Will.
Yeah, so let's just say it was printed in Legacy or whatever. How much would that card be worth today? I mean, that's just a fun little thought experiment to think about, how...
Because it sees, vintage play. I mean, Underworld Breach.
I mean, it sees modern play.
It sees play kind of everywhere.
Yeah, and if there was obviously more decks that could have taken advantage of, filling up the graveyard and stuff when it was Standard legal. So what's really cool about Breach now is I play a little bit of Modern. It is a 1 to 2 of in the prowess list, because you just generate so much advantage with your Dragon Rage Chandler and your Metamorphose, and you're just churning through your deck, making Swift Spear, Skullscar Mage able to just be bigger than everything on the board, and also just burn your opponent out. Now, obviously that doesn't necessarily affect its contention in cEDH, but just the effectiveness of what that card does, and just as it not necessarily even a game-ending piece, if you have 7 cards in your graveyard, it still can generate the value that you need. And I think too, if you haven't played with very experienced cEDH players, or people who are savvy, they really don't utilize their breach probably often enough. They try to save it for that one moment, and I get how powerful that is, but a card that can be a value piece or a game-ending piece is just threatening on its own. And it's 2 mana, it's in red. Obviously, within just the last 2 years, we got Dockside, Jessica's Will, and Breach, which all kind of feed into this engine that we're talking about.
It's also made main phase ad nauseing a absolutely achievable like proposition.
Yeah.
Like before, I feel like you didn't necessarily have the explosivity to be able to do such a thing. You wanted to wait until the end step prior to your turn. But like now, if you're in red, just jam that shit, you know?
Oh yeah, for sure.
That's the probably the biggest thing is just like a lot of these more recent sets is just red is so powerful now. Like it's and that's another thing. Looking at cEDH.stats, it is the most common color now at this point. Red is seeing more play than blue. Blue has more cards that see play, and decks that play blue tend to play more blue cards than red cards. But red is the most popular color in the format.
Yeah, and I would just throw in what I said. I know it's necessarily not widely as played as much as obviously these cards, but just something as simple as a Dragon Rage Chandler. Again, it's a 1 mana card, so it's fundamentally costed well, but it falls into this strategy line of hyper efficiency, fuels the graveyard, exactly what these colors are trying to do. And while we're not getting like the Force of Wills and those type of the Ristic Studies, the impact of those specific red cards, less than Dragon Rage Chandler, more so the other ones that I just mentioned, they're more impactful on the game as like just a generic, here's a new mana dork, or here's just here's Allosaurus Shepherd, solid card, sees play. I play it in Tropical Malcolm and it sees play in its respected decks, but it's not like a card like what Jessica's Will can do and just some of that power level that it has. But yeah, just falling into the Breach line, and then we haven't even really dived into Thassa's Oracle yet.
Yeah.
So
I do want to say about Breach before we go into Thassa is it is probably like a perfect example of a card that makes this discussion we're having so pointless, because it's just like a card that benefits from cards from like all these other sets that we're discussing, and it makes it really hard to say like, oh, in a vacuum is Underworld Breach good with no other cards? Is it good? No, but it's good with every other card basically.
Well, I think that's why you have to define what you mean by influential. You know what I mean? Like it's. This conversation, in my point, is not moot in a world where Underworld Breach doesn't exist, right? It can't influence something if it doesn't exist. But in the current meta right now, as it currently exists, I think it holds the title for most influential set.
I think we'll go into Thassa's Oracle, and I'll mention another one that I want to bring up before we go into these last two sets. Thassa's Oracle led to probably the most the biggest ban in recent cEDH history. We had the Flash meta. We'll just talk about that, I guess, right?
Yeah, so what I always think was funny is I talk with people who like played Sushi Hulk at the time, and they're always like, yeah, I would typically get breakfast anyway because it was easier to defend, which I always thought was hilarious. But yeah, you could do like a Hulk line that was just like, what was it? Spellseeker, Blood Pet, Thassa's Oracle, Spellseeker for Demonic Consult, just sack the Blood Pet,
Yeah, it came out and sort of had this huge impact, and then like post Flash, it's sort of like generally what we refer to as the current meta, I guess. Is still, we're living in post Flash times, but it is still mostly a world defined by Thassa's Oracle as the primary pure win con card that wins you the game just outright, and has led to kind of the current status of Dimir, but also, as we were saying, Grixis as being the de facto like sort of best thing you can do in the format for the most part.
Yeah, so when I look at Thassa's Oracle as a card, first off, it's 2 mana, it's blue. It has utility, even if you're not winning. It's not necessarily the greatest impact on the game, but it's not a dead card. And then it happens to also be a wizard. So it's one of the best creature types in the game, and it just feels like, and we've all played that game where whether we're doing it or on the other side of it, when that Thassa's Oracle comes into play, the card to defend is the Demonic Consultation. Well, you don't, if it gets countered or stopped, you don't get punished. Your Thassa's Oracle just comes into play. You probably play a Breach, cast Demonic Consultation, or have a Tame Pack backup line or something like that again. So it's not only is it just have 2 mana win the game on it, it's the fact that it's really hard to punish on top of it. It's not like blowing out a Twin Flame dual caster mage combo or Chain of Smog or something like that. It's just one of those cards, and the fact that it is in blue, and it's very, very worst fell case, it is pitchable to a Force of Will or a Force of Negation, mostly more so Force of Will, where you don't necessarily want to do that, but again, it like checks all the boxes of utility.
Yeah, and then just its trigger, it just being hard to interact with.
Yeah.
It not requiring a separate card to draw on an empty library, which means if you can... Like, I honestly find it's a bit safer sometimes to go for that win without the consult and just, like, brain freeze yourself if you can get, like, the brain freeze stuff combo going and you just put all of your stuff in your graveyard. You've got all the interaction you could ever want. And then you go for the Thoracle win. I find that's a good way to go about it typically as well, to kind of make it, but it not being hit by negates, stifle effects being almost ridiculed in the format.
Yeah,
really
probably
just
wrongfully
kind of,
so. I feel like
it's a hard argument.
Yeah.
It's just like, is stifle really worth a card? And that's not. I mean, I stifle is currently in my Karakushima deck. I will be honest. Mostly because I can repeat it, but there's definitely an argument for dropping it. It is, but yeah, it's just so hard to interact with when it finally comes down. If you were doing it with, Flash even, like off of a Protean Hulk, then good luck. But yeah, it's not broken in my opinion. It is very homogenous though.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'm like, wow, I really would wish someone would try something new, but it is what it is.
it's they're sort of, I guess one thing we didn't mention here that most people probably know, it is the most efficient mana cost investment generally to win the game is Thassa's Oracle, Demonic Constellation, 2 blue and a black. Very, very efficient. And it is in what were, I think when it released, probably less now with just like pure Dimir, but it's in probably the 2 best colors in the format, blue and black. Kind of like, and the card investment is like 3 card slots generally. Thassa's Oracle, Demonic Constellation, Tainted Pack, which is pretty low, and like Eric said, Thassa's Oracle has a little bit of utility, and then Demonic Constellation and Tainted Pack can both really help you out in a pinch as well. They can be useful as instant speed tutors. So you're put into the best colors, you have the most efficient win con, and then it's very low investment, it's very hard to punish, and it's very hard to react with, or to interact with. And so, you get all of these things, and then, you get, you start to define the entire format, really. I do think it would feel, I feel like the cards themselves would be, like if Thassa's Oracle was whatever, a white card, we're in a whole different meta. I think that's how impactful it is. If suddenly it's Orzhov has access to the most efficient win con, with very little investment, then things start to look a little bit differently. But being in the best colors can kind of lead to the homogeneity that a lot of people complain about for Thoracle Consult.
And it's really hard right now in, like, how many Magic cards have they printed over the 30-year span? Like, it's a pretty large
like
number, right? It's like something probably 250,000 or something crazy like that, just a guess. But
It's a lot.
it's hard when, like, now, like, I feel like and I think it's just from the reactionary. It's more reactionary for me, but every time I see a blue card that's like remotely good, I'm like, here we go again, even though that's not the case. But like when I looked at the Innistrad Werewolf Vampire set and they printed like Hullbreaker Horror and like Malevolent Hermit, I was just like, Oh, look, a really great, a really solid blue creature that protects her ad nauseum, that also has utility, and then blue just gets this other like uncounterable win condition style effect.
Yeah.
And it's just we're in that where we've got so many cards. It's hard for cards to like really not find a home if they're like marginally decent. Like even if it's not in cEDH, a regular commander itself, more casual, you're gonna see those type of cards just kind of pop up. And then obviously this format being an optimized format and the power level and the efficiency of cards increasing. I mean, I personally don't believe 2 mana. There should never really be a 2 mana card that says I win the game on it. I don't like that effect. It's not like a Coalition Victory, which is, I think that's the card's name, where that card's like you're basically like having to like form and go on this adventure and all this other stuff to like make it happen. And then there's just this blue card that does it.
Yeah, like you have to jump through so many hoops for Coalition Victory versus a Thoracle, which is just nothing really. Which I guess we had a 2 mana win the game card with Labman. It's just that it wasn't an ETB, which changes everything.
I think Labman was 3 mana, wasn't it?
Oh, is it?
2 in a blue? Yeah, I think
so.
Oh,
it might be.
2 in a blue.
Oh, that card sucks. Nowadays.
You don't see it anywhere. Yeah.
Talk about an upgrade.
Yeah, so again, you look at it, it's just such a powerful effect. Even the threat of it there.
Yeah.
Like Claire said, decks have to even sometimes maybe think or skew around it. Like there for a while, I was playing Tropical Malcolm, and I ran Endurance in my list just to have that. Eventually, I just cut it, just because I'd rather be doing my thing better anyways. But again, it's like one of those things of where you think about that, like, do I need to be more proactive with my list, or do I need to at least have something that's somewhat reactive that doesn't necessarily take away from my deck? So those 2 cards specifically just at least make you have to ask those type of questions. Like in decks like low color decks, where you get to like just kind of play whatever decent new card comes out and you don't have to really think about it. And we had this discussion about Corvold. It's like you have to identify every single card that comes out if it produces a treasure. And most of those cards actually don't even go into Corvold at all.
Yeah.
Because it's not necessarily what the deck's trying to do. So defining like with these decks, does this card put cards in the graveyard? Does it go with, Underworld Breach? Does this card, I mean even as something as simple as like Step Through, the ability to cycle for a wizard is just really wild in itself. And not to mention tutoring up like Spellseeker or something like that.
Yeah, I think we kind of went, so like currently it's probably the combo that defines, 'cause I think it's important that when you evaluate a format, you kind of see like what the general speed is of it and how quickly you need to win or be able to stop a win. And like Thassa's Oracle is kind of the current card that defines that. Like in the Flash meta, it was to the point where you had to either be able to stop a turn 0 or turn 1 win attempt. Now we're closer to like turn 1, turn 2. But it's still like primarily defined by this card, I think, and that is a key part of the format. Like I think Underworld Breach probably defines card selection and a lot of the play patterns of cEDH more so than Thassa's Oracle, but Thassa's Oracle I think defines a lot of the speed and unfortunately sort of the stigma of cEDH is that it's just Thassa's Oracle Consult. You don't really have people complain as much like, it's just Underworld Breach, but they complain about, it takes 20 minutes for somebody to do their Underworld Breach. But yeah, those are kind of the big ones. Theros Beyond Death.
Yeah, they definitely complain about Thoracle wins though.
Yeah. To the point where like 100% playing with power stopped putting Thassa's Oracle in their Turbo Nas Grixis list for their videos just so that people would stop complaining about it at one point. There's a couple month period where they had just stopped putting Thassa's Oracle in decks that should play it. That's probably the other thing is I think Underworld Breach probably opens up brewing. Thassa's Oracle definitely closes it off, I feel like, where it's just like, okay, I'm in blue-black. These 3 cards must go in here. They don't really synergize with anything. They don't. I think you can kind of look at them. They don't really inspire creativity the way that a lot of brewers want to be inspired. Like Underworld Breach works with so many different cards in so many different ways. You can be a little bit more creative, I feel like, with a card like that versus Thassa's Oracle, which is an A plus B combo that most of the good decks are playing.
I think there's a place for that, personally. Yeah. I like where the cEDH meta is at the moment, so I'm definitely a proponent for it. Like, I do think that Thoracle is boring, but I think it's also necessary, and it's not bad.
Yeah.
But it is format defining.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I think that a lot of cEDH win conditions are kind of boring too, like Dualcaster Twin Flame. Like A plus B combos are just kind of boring in general. But cEDH has never really been about how I'm winning, what I derive enjoyment from it. Yeah, it's the huge stacks and fighting through things and threading the needle with your mana margins and stuff like that. So that's why it doesn't bother me, but I definitely understand.
Yeah, to me, I don't really feel that way about it, where it's like, I think it's a problem. I think, you get rid of part of it. It's just, the line shifts to where, what is the new A plus B? What's the new win con everybody plays? To me, that's always going to be there because we're in a format where we're driven by optimization and we're in a combo-centric format. So unless they ban literally every single combo, which would make the ban list, I don't even know how much bigger, probably times 1,000, the current size of it, which isn't going to happen. Then it's just going to be moving the line. Like you said, it will be Saw in half, Dualcaster Mage or whatever it ends up being, Dualcaster Twin Flame, Chain of Smog, which
I am really excited to get my hands on this on.
That's going to be cool.
Not even going to lie.
But I think it would just move the line. I don't really mind it, but it is a thing that, like we mentioned, you go to comment sections of cEDH videos with a lot of views. That's where people are complaining about, even though I think it is short-sighted. I mean, I have a whole video about to come out about why I think the cards that win the games don't matter. But, which I think is especially true. Like you said, for cEDH, the battle to win is what makes it engaging for people. When you just, if you just turn one Thoracle Consult, you got to win and that's cool, but it isn't as engaging of an experience when there's not that back and forth battle between everybody.
I want to make a point of what Claire said. So it's actually really, really insightful. Well, I personally, I don't necessarily play, most of my decks doesn't have that. And even in fact, my secondary deck is Tropical Malcolm. So it doesn't play Thassa Oracle or Underworld Breach, which is pretty wild when you really think about that deck. And it's like, wait a minute, it doesn't run either of these cards, but that's not how the deck's inherently designed. But by removing that combo, while you would just go to the next A-B combo, the 3 mana versus 4 mana, the format would dramatically shift because you would really look at these stacks decks, and not even these true stacks decks, but just stacks decks with just simple, a few pieces or just a couple of rule law effects. The format would completely shift to this weird, and these decks all see play. We'll have these shifts in the season where, Stax is doing really well, and then Thrasios is doing really well. But ultimately, when you look at the top, it's a lot what was it? There was a few tournaments back we looked at, there's hardly any blue. And now if you look at the tournaments as of late, tons of blue, you know. But it would really shift the dynamics to where, these slower decks, and I don't even really think they're inherently slow, we can get into turn order and all that stuff some other time. But where these decks now have a greater foothold and can really lock the game down. And I'll be honest, like we said, if the game ends on 1 or 2 and I mulliganed appropriately, I did the best I could, okay, cool. I shuffle up and I get to play Magic again. And that's also the beauty of the format, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think I guess people who are invested already in cEDH do some of those people will have problems with Thoracle Consult being the thing. I think most of us can look at it and just say things are pretty awesome right now. Something's got to be the best right now. It's Thoracle Consult, okay, and then you just go from there. Yeah, and then cards like, I think Destiny Spinner was one I didn't think about as much until I looked at Theros, and it's like, that goes in every green deck, you know?
Yeah.
Pretty big one. Heliod Suncrowned, not a common for the 99, but a pretty well known, at least, and sometimes more highly played white mono white commander. Kroxa, it was a deck I want to be good more than it is good, but it is a really cool list. World Warrior Dragon stuff I think is really awesome. But and like we said, it is kind of highly played. But yeah, most of Theros Beyond Death is in that Thoracle Breach, and I think unquestionably it is like a top 3 most influential. If it's not number 1, it is so close to it. You know, we're splitting hairs about the definition of influence, I think. Would you guys like to move on to one of the other big sets?
Oh yeah.
Sure, let's do partners.
Okay, yeah. So Commander 2016, the list I have, at least for currently, like I said, pretty much every partner got experimented with at the beginning. A lot of like the opposite partners. So like I don't even remember their names, but the other Orzhov one was getting more play than Tymna, and the other what is it, Kydel, I think, was getting more play than Thrasios at certain points, but then people quickly realized to flip that. So for this, I have Brea Ethereum
Soultender.
Yeah,
is his name.
Yeah,
Bravos Soultender.
We've got Brea Ethereum Shaper, Silas Wren, Bruce Tarl, Yidris Maelstrom Wielder, Vile Smasher the Fierce, Thrasios Triton Hero, Tana the Bloodsower, Tymna the Weaver, Crom Ludovic's Opus, Ishai Ojutai Dragon Speaker, Ikra Shadiki the Usurper, and then the one card that isn't a commander in the set that sees a tiny bit of play some places is Conqueror's Flail. Mostly commanders, and Conqueror's Flail is an iffy include, but I think, it sees some play.
So I totally agree that this set has a ton of influence on deck building and color availability, especially. Yeah. My biggest problem with saying it is the most influential, is because the way it's influential is so vanilla. And this is like my problem with a lot of these like very, very good commanders. And I play them, don't get me wrong. I will jam games on Blue Farm all day long. That deck is a joy to pilot. But Crom is just good.
Yeah.
Thrasios is just good anywhere. Tymna also, Tymna, I think we were talking about this in the thread, but Tymna has the best case for like warping deck design around it, because Tymna, at least she requires you to, swing in at multiple opponents. Definitely really good with, win conless creature-based stacks. I love that. But just generically good in general. And I think forces a lot of decks to try and play sort of this mid-rangey value engine sort of thing. For sure.
I think Tymna, in the same way that Underworld Breach and even kind of wild, but like cards like Krark, actually, they change how we evaluate new cards. In they're like we evaluate a creature versus a Tymna list, or as part of a Tymna list. I feel like cheap, efficient creatures. If this can block and kill a Tymna, that changes things a lot.
Or think about the hype around like Grim Hireling or Professional Facebreaker.
Yeah, because they play into that.
Yeah.
What you're already doing. So yeah, I think
you're like,
okay.
I'm sorry. No, you're just like, I'm already on Tymna.
Yeah.
This effect is busted with Tymna, so exactly. Let's do it.
I think Tymna probably, like you said, is the one that changes your gameplay the most, because like I think Crom creates more interesting stuff than some of the other ones, like Tana, for instance. Like Crom actually changes how your opponents might play, but it is sort of like a generically good effect to throw out, and it works well with Tymna, which does change its evaluation. I think strengthens Tymna's argument. But
I'm on the. I think Drake Sasser posted this like a month ago,
Mhm.
but I agree with him. I think Crom is the best of the partner commanders.
partners?
I thought about it a lot, and it's just having the card draw not be based off of anything you are doing and not having to put any of your resources at risk to take advantage of it is just so good. Whereas with Timma, you always run into the problems of like, well, people have blockers and I'm not going to make good trades. And that's why I definitely think Crom is the most effective of those. And just blue-red is just very stupid right now.
I think looking at them together, they kind of work well at their cost because Timna, you can generally get her out in turn 1, turn 2, and be attacking with something quickly before other people develop attackers. And then by the time Crom hits, or even, you can power out, like a turn 1 Crom kind of changes the dynamic of the game the way that like a Rhystic Study or a Mystic Remora can change it, though to a different extent, but it's still... You start thinking about your turns different.
Especially in a meta that's pretty dominated by using life as a resource too.
Yeah.
Like you get that turn 1 Crom down, you immediately start swinging for 4 at the other Adnos player.
Yeah.
Or you start swinging at the Crick player or even the Quark player because like Get Probe is essentially Adnosium too.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's putting that pressure on early is definitely super good as well.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think it's changed. I guess another one that does have a strong identity would probably be Ishai. With Jessica, Ishai is like probably the least generic, I guess I'd say, partner pairing that has a goal that's pretty unique of just smacking you with one of its partners and killing you, as early as like turn 2, which is pretty awesome.
The fact that neither of those commanders can draw cards though is very rough.
Yeah.
I'm so much more discerning of my mulligans with that deck than I am with like Blue Farm or any like a Timna deck or a Crom deck.
Yeah, I think the other thing to look at is with each of these, they all sort of break the rules, and that you basically, in Commander, you get a +1 to your starting hand. These decks get a +2, and then specifically with the ones that draw cards, you get an extra card in your opening hand, essentially, and that extra card draws you cards. It can really change. I think a lot of them can change the game in very small ways that kind of incrementally get you value that can be easier to ignore than like, a big commander that comes out and immediately changes things like a Corvold or something like that. But they just like you said, you don't have to mulligan as strictly, I guess, when you're piloting a deck like Blue Farm, where you have 2 sources of card draw in the command zone, and you've got extra commanders to begin with, extra cards in your hand, and you're in the best colors in the format.
Yeah, so to parody off that a little bit, when we're talking about Crom and just the power level of what Crom has, because it's a really interesting discussion. And I forgot which of the major content channels did Is Thrasio. I think it was the Mind Sculptors, but they did one on, I think it was like last year. Is Thrasio still good? Mm-hmm. And like, yes, Thrasio's really great card, but when you just look at what like Crom can do to what we talked about to like the battlefield and everything, and there for a while it was Ikra Crom, which was a really hot deck for a while. And you look at these 2-5, like we know what Crom does, but Ikra is not really that powerful. But what Ikra does for that deck really, again, using life as a resource, really allows you to pressure people while generating all this life. It allows you to maximize on cards like Period the Best, Ad Nauseam, Bolts the Citadels, and things like Necropotence, those type of cards. It's just impressive to see what anything that pairs with Crom is solid. Like, it's in terms of like, if you have a cohesive strategy in what you're doing and you take one of these partners and you pair it with Crom, whether it's Timna, Ikra, even as something as silly as, and it was never really big, but it was kind of like, Thrasio's Crom. While it's not as good as the 4-color advantage pod decks or anything like that, if you build your deck appropriately, it's still just really powerful blue cards, really powerful green cards, and really powerful red cards with 2 commanders that generate value while still providing a threat. And that's just something really interesting that Crom does. Also, it's really easy to cast. I mean,
Yeah.
blue, it's pretty interesting that what that card does. I always jokingly said it was like a Stormbreath Dragon that drew cards in Commander. It just comes down, turns sideways, and punishes decks for walling up. It's I mean, as much as I like Tevish, it's a reason why like my meta is really Crom like active, and so like it's one of those things of like when I was like playing Tevish and I was like, man, it's so feel bad as you play Tevish and there's 2 Crom players and they just kill your guy. But on top of that too, again, it affects it. When I like build Corval, for example, like there for a while we were talked about like I was cutting on Blast because blue was dying in my meta, and I'm not saying it's dead, but it's just like other decks where like people are trending in, and so but I was just like, man, 1 red to kill a Crom is still just really, really too good. It's too good, and I don't ever want to be caught where like Crom comes down, pressures my life way too fast, where it renders like ad nauseum cards like that kind of fruitless. So Crom is just extremely powerful card, and I can really get behind Crom being easily, not necessarily easy, but tied like 1A, 1B right there with Tymna.
Yeah.
And I just think too, it's just Tymna's like let's say Tymna was like white-green. Would it be nearly as powerful? Maybe not.
Yeah. I think a lot of the way we evaluate the partners is like it's somewhat their ability and somewhat their colors, because like we mentioned earlier, like if Silas Wren was really good, I think the way cEDH would have developed would have been really different, like completely different, because we would have been looking at like different partners that go with Silas Wren instead of different partners that go with Crom or Thrasios or Tymna, and like to get the colors that you want, and it really changes things. But I do think a good argument for this set being the most influential is that since it came out, I think you could define sort of like eras of the cEDH meta as what the best partner pairing is at the time. Whereas was like TNT is probably the most iconic cEDH list ever with Tymna Thrasios. And then now we're more Tymna Crom, and at different points, like you said, Ikra Crom was really big. Tymna Tana Blood Pod has gone in and out of favor. Where Tymna Bruce even, like that's like, Mad Farm.
The original Mad Farm.
Yeah. Where like these are like the defining decks of the format are generally just like which Commander 2016 commanders are you using? I think gives it a good argument.
And I think
and it really.
Go ahead,
sorry.
Claire.
I was just gonna say it really kind of just comes down to, because I think the first 3 colors, right, are, I mean, pretty set, honestly. Like, you do Dimir, and then you have white because of Tymna.
Yeah.
And so Esper kind of is your base. And then it's whether or not green is better than red or vice versa, really, is what it comes down to, in my opinion.
Yeah, 'cause I think honestly, the cEDH meta, the way it developed is so, like, it seems so planned out because, like you mentioned, like, if it's green versus red in a lot of instances, and, like, Tymna Thrasios was really good when those sort of mid-range decks were very powerful. And then, like, as red, like we mentioned, red has been the most power crept color in the last, like, 3 or 4 years. And, like, as red has come about, it's pushed Thrasios, not completely out, but more out in favor of, like, Crom to switch to that red. And it's matched what that deck does a lot better as well. Just power stuff out, draw cards, turbo Nas as quickly as you can, do Underworld Breach stuff. And
then win with Oracle.
Yeah, then you win with Oracle.
Yeah.
You do your 2016 into your Theros Beyond Death.
Exactly.
When you look at the you said like TNT, when you now look at it, I mean, it's pretty hard to argue in terms of, like, I know Clark Sakashima just won, and that deck is like exploded, and part of that, the deck is really good. It's good colors. Also, it has a very loyal fan base behind it too. So, and the decks, it's got a very just cult following. But Blue Farm, in terms of like, and I really don't like to say best deck because this, Yisan could randomly win, an event, or there's just all these different variations. There was like Yeva won not too long ago, and then there was a mono white list, and then Magda won. But in terms of just overall, like Blue Farm is right there for me, and a big part of that is not only the uptick in red, access to those cards, but also Ranger Captain and Esper Sentinel really just added to what that deck needed. And what it's also really good at, you get a creature for Tymna, built-in silence effect, a card advantage into a card advantage piece.
Yeah.
And it just does little random things like make your Mox Opal just a slightly bit better because it happens to be an artifact creature. And it kind of fills that gap. So that's when I look at that deck. To me, that is the probably most complete deck in the format, from top to bottom. Like if I wasn't such a Corvold stan or, a Malcolm stan, if you said, hey, blind meta, pick a deck, that's probably the deck I would pick.
Yeah.
More so than a deck like Najeela.
Najeela's very good. I don't want to put Najeela down, but I think the problem with Najeela is like kind of what I was saying before. Having card advantage in the command zone is just incredibly good. It's just too good. So like you have to be more discerning with your mulligans with Najeela. Like you either have to be able to win or you need to be able to put down an early card advantage engine like a Sylvan Library or something.
Yeah.
With a Tymna deck, like oftentimes I'll keep a hand that's just like turn 1 Tymna.
Yeah.
Like if I can land turn 1 Tymna and I got nothing else going on, it's just like maybe a Fierce Guardianship and some cantrips or something. It's like, yeah, we'll jam this. That's fine.
Yeah, I think it definitely changes the way you look at the game. And you had kind of mentioned Eric about being like a Corvold stand, keeping you off of Blue Farm, stuff like that. I 100% believe that the cEDH community being as small as it is why we don't see as much Blue Farm, because I think we have like such like hyper focused like brewers and people who want to experiment and just try to break the format, and there aren't as many people who are just like play the best deck, try to win. And there are like so many people who just like look for more niche things or things that they may be aligned to a bit more. And like people just kind of thinking Blue Farm is boring or TNT is boring, I think keeps that deck, like they're already kind of overrepresented, or like they're represented pretty highly. I think that keeps the deck underrepresented is just the small community we have tending towards pet decks, even though like I said, a lot of these pet decks are really powerful and they're really good and they're not like way below Blue Farm, but I think it keeps people from those decks. And like you mentioned with Kark Sakashima, like I have never met a person as into Blue Farm or some of the more like generic 4-5 color lists as much as like the average Kark Sakashima player. Even they're just like
it's so addicting though.
Yeah,
it's just very, very addicting. But I had a point in response to that, actually, because one of the things that I think Quark Saka takes advantage of, and this is one of the reasons why I think Ken took Tier 1 Con, is because Quark plays he takes advantage of the kind of mores of the cEDH community, wherein you're not looking to counter creature-based engines. You're trying to counter what ends up happening. Like, no one counters the Tymna, they counter the Ad Nauseam. Yeah. You can't really do that with Kark Sakashima. As soon as they even have Kark and Sakashima in play, they could drop like a Jeska's Will, and you can't, if they happen to get all three Jeska's Wills, you can't counter all three typically. Yeah. So it's typically over at that point, and a lot of players who don't play against that deck often or even don't want to commit resources to something that may or may not win the game will let through Krark, they'll let through the Saka, and then they'll let them untap, and then at that point it may just be over. Yeah. So that's like a big advantage that deck has too, in my opinion.
I think it takes advantage of players' reliance on known information and making decisions based off of that. Like absolutely. You mentioned, like you don't worry about the Tymna because like you said, a single Krark doesn't really do anything. And you can usually like, kind of typically in Magic, you want to do something the latest that you can, because you have the most information. You get, you put the thing on the stack last, you're gonna get to have it happen first. Blah blah blah. But yeah, like we mentioned with Kark Sakashima, once it goes to cast that first spell, you have pretty much already lost that interaction. If they're if you've got 2 Kark triggers or 3, whatever, and then they go to cast the spell, you're already like behind in card advantage. You're very unlikely to come out ahead of that interaction already. And I had got in on that argument before, where it's just like, if the Kark player says I'm not the threat, my usual response is I don't care. I don't care.
Yeah, and that's fair. And I've played plenty of games where I play. In fact, the reason I brought that up is because my good friend Bab made a post about that this morning.
Yeah.
About Kark, and because she plays against a lot of Kark, playing against me, and plays against Ken a lot too.
Yeah.
And that's, I'm used to that being that.
Yeah.
Treated like that, to be honest, because when I'm playing games privately with like a lot of my friends, they are ruthless, but I'm still able to get wins. That deck can bounce back very easily too. Yeah.
And it's also like, you can, especially, I do think to one extent there is a lack of permanent removal, specifically creature removal, that it preys on. Because a lot of like the big creatures that warp the format, like we said, are Tymna and Tymna attackers, and it's not necessarily that they're that good and like real problem pieces. They just kind of get value. But like Kark Sakashima are permanents that you must remove, or you're going to lose if they're able to establish them.
Or you Academy Rector into a Humility.
There you go.
That also works.
Yep. So yeah, do you guys want to touch on Commander 2016, or we want to touch on one of the other big sets?
So we were just talking Commander 2016, correct?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I would like to go over Alpha, to be honest. Like Alpha
okay, that was
Beta.
the next one I was going to go over, and then because originally when Claire and I first had the discussion, I was on the Commander 2016 side. Then I looked at Alpha Beta, because a lot of people were mentioning that, and I think it has. So in terms of like pure influence on the game, Alpha Beta wins. Period. It made the game. From that perspective, like an originalist point of view, it wins. Obviously, kind of pointless to mention that, but in terms of the number of cards it has that influence the game, I think it also wins. Period. You got 15 lands that see play in every single deck. With the 5 basics and the 10 dual lands. And then we have just a big list of staples. And then, obviously, half of this list would probably double if there wasn't a ban list, obviously. But we have Soul Ring, Swords to Plowshares, Demonic Tutor, Llanowar Elves, Birds of Paradise, Dark Ritual, Time Twister, Mana Vault, Animate Dead, Wild Growth, Red Elemental Blast, Basalt Monolith, Wheel of Fortune, Winter Orb, Copy Artifact, Stasis, Fork, Sacrifice, the 10 dual lands, and then the 5 basics. Yeah, this is a lot.
I guess my counter argument to it, and I'm not denying the originalist interpretation at all. If you're just talking about like the foundation of the game, then I definitely think that there's no way to really argue any other way. But the problem I have is taking my perspective as someone who lives in the year of 2022.
Yep.
There are a lot of redundant effects that in the effects that Alpha presents, right? Like, so you've got like Animate Dead, sure, but you've also got like Necromancy. You've got Dance of the Dead.
Yeah.
None of these cards are irreplaceable as far as I see it.
Probably.
So,
I think the biggest example of something like Time Twister is kind of unique for it has an equivalent, but it costs like double the mana. But
I'm not a Time Twister defender at all. I think that card is bad.
I don't think it's positioned current. I don't think it's positioned well currently, but it is a card that can kind of function as like a one card win con for some lists, and it has its use. And
a lot of those decks that can use Twister loops can also loop their decks with endurance, actually. So that's pretty hot.
Wheel of Fortune is the other half of the most, like we mentioned, the most common played thing. It's like just stapled at the hip of Underworld Breach for the most part. At least statistically. Should it be? Probably a little overplayed, but I mean that's where we're at currently with it, at least.
I definitely think Brain Freeze is the better option.
Yeah. A lot of good stack stuff though with Winter Orb Stasis, which not as many lists are on those types of effects aren't as common now because kind of you're hitting mana. Yeah, you're hitting mana that it's like the big thing you need to stop is like the influx of mana people get after casting an Adnaz or casting a Dockside and hitting like their lands, or because there are other cards like Armageddon has seen play, doesn't usually work very well in today's meta because like you might play 2 lands a game. Depending on the deck you play, you're not gonna be utilizing your lands too much. And then a lot of dorks. Demonic Tutor's obviously very good, and then some of the most widely played mana ramp, obviously.
Yeah, so Demonic Tutor is pretty, Demonic Tutor is probably, for me, out of all those cards, is probably the most, because it is the 2 mana straight to the hand tutor.
Yeah.
While we have cards like Vampiric, Imperial Seal, those type of ones, they're not straight to the hand exactly. But the set is it obviously was the first, and it was unique for that. But in terms of now we're looking at a span of Magic.
Yeah.
In terms of uniqueness, if I had to cut all 3 dual lands from my Corval list, what would I play? And it really wouldn't be yes, I like those cards, and it might change me playing Orcish Lumberjack, but it's not defining that list, it's not something that's taking out when I look at those cards, and those cards are really powerful and they're very good. But in terms of pure influence on the game, and you could argue that the fast mana set the tone, but in reality, Mana Crypt wasn't even in a set originally. It was it was a promo card.
We'll go over that.
So yeah. So so when I look at that and Mana Crypt being a 0 mana card at that at particular time, just giving you 2 mana, it's Soul Ring was so good. It's hard for me to think, because I think about, okay, so let's strip these cards down. What would cEDH look like without it? Right now, would it still be some variation of what we have if that set did not exist? But we had there's not going to be a Birds of Paradise, but there's Ignoble Hierarch, Noble Hierarch. There's all these other variation of Green Dorks. Obviously, there's Finhorn Elves. There's Elvish Mystic. So that right there. Dark Ritual is another card that's pretty interesting without, because obviously that induces the hyper format. For Turbo and Nauseam, but we still have Calling the Weak, we still have Cabal Ritual on top of that. So those unique effects, and it's almost like it's its own enemy in this argument, because it set the standard and it set the variation for cards to come out afterwards.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of cards that call back to the you see cards that even made the namesake, what is a ritual now? What is a tutor? Here it is. This is where it came from for most of these. I pretty much agree with that. The game would look different. I think mana bases especially look different. You ban the dual lands. Obviously, it's going to change how things work. It's going to make Tainted Bag actually really hard for some decks. But in terms of the way that we play, I don't actually think that this list radically reshapes the way we think of the format. I think if you get rid of this, I do think obviously most influential, blah blah blah, but in terms of how we play now, I think you ban these, and then we start to, you just kind of lower the card quality of some decks.
For sure. Yeah.
I mean, there's other things here
Completely.
and there are some that have been power crept so much they're not even really worth. Like Counterspell is in this set. We're not really playing Counterspell anymore. There's just so many good options for a lot of these things. Yeah, probably the biggest game changer, like we mentioned, like the Dorks are some of the most highly played cards. Soul Ring, Mana Vault are 2 of the top 5 most played cards in the game. So things slow down and card quality decreases, I think, maybe about as much as any one set could impact, like the capability of our speed and our card quality. But yeah, I think the format largely looks the same. We're just going to be like doing Underworld Breach stuff slightly worse, doing Ad Nauseam slightly worse, doing stacks slightly worse. Urza probably sucks, but
Yeah, true.
but yeah, there's not really, kind of like this and Commander 2016, like a lot of the cards are so like kind of generic. There isn't a lot to talk about the wide range. Like we said, like these are very replaceable cards. There's not that much to discuss about what a war without them looks like, I think. Any other remarks on this one?
I agree 100% with what you're saying. I think it's a very powerful set that influences the speed of the format a lot. But like, as far as what the format looks like, I think you just start going a tier down.
Yeah.
In as far as the similar effects that are available, because like a lot of them are so archetypical that they've been replaced in other sets.
Also, I didn't even put Lightning Bolt. I guess Lightning Bolt's gone too. I forgot about that one. But yeah, no banless cEDH, completely different format. You lose all the cards that are good. But yeah, you had mentioned, so looking at the stats for cEDH, the most played card in the format is Mana Crypt, which, like you mentioned, is not really in a set. It's in the Harper books promos. There's like 5 other cards. None of them have or ever will see play in cEDH. They're all terrible except Mana Crypt, which is a ridiculous card. The second most played card in the format is from what I would argue might be the most influential set for cEDH, and that is Chrome Mox from Mirrodin. With Mirrodin, we get Chrome Mox, Talisman of Dominance, Indulgence, Progress, Unity, and Impulse. We get the entire Spell Bomb cycle. I don't even know the names of all 5 of them, but all 5 of them see niche play around the format. The artifact lands, which are a lot worse post-Oxide, but have seen play and still do a bit. Chromatic Sphere, Gilded Lotus, Isochron Scepter, Fabricate, Seething Song, Mirror Retriever, Rule of Law, Chalice of the Void, Proteus Staff, Krark's Thumb, which is weird to put, but it goes on the list now, and Tooth and Nail. Yeah. To me, the probably the 3 cards, maybe 4 cards that define the format the most are Ad Nauseam, which is in Shards of Alara. It's not worth mentioning. The rest of the set sucks. Ad Nauseam, Thassa's Oracle, Underworld Breach, and Rule of Law. I think Rule of Law has as warping for the format as any other of these cards, I would argue, and probably changes when it resolves. Maybe changes the game more than like Rule of Law and other Rule of Law. Like we mentioned, Deafening Silence. Rule of Law specifically hits everybody for the most part. And I think it's one of the more warping cards. And like we mentioned, Chalice of the Void also being on there is a big one. Proteus Staff being kind of a defining card for polymorph strategies. Like I mentioned, almost every single list is going to run some of the ramp that's in this set with the Talismans and Chrome Mox. And then Isochron Scepter and kind of together with it, Fabricate, kind of defining cards in lists. Isochron Scepter not as big currently, but it's sort of a meta call, and depending on it.
So the one thing about Rule of Law is that I think Rule of Law is more so influential because it's a white card opposed to its actually original counterpart in Arcane Laboratory, because that effect was always there.
Yeah.
And obviously blue decks typically want to play like multiple cards per turn, but we see blue X white stack space list out there, whether it's with red, obviously. You have Advantage Blue Pod, you have Dawnwicker Thrasios, and then so those two specifically run Rule of Law. I mean, it could easily just run Arcane Laboratory, and it's the same thing. So that's one of those things that's kind of interesting about Rule of Law. Like, it's called a Rule of Law effect. In reality, it's Arcane Laboratory effect.
Yeah. It just fits, I guess, specifically with what white wants to do way more than traditionally what blue wants to do, especially current modern day blue.
But when we look at so if I was to look at like something like a Rule of Law, so let's say if Rule of Law was gone and that card didn't exist, there would still be Rule of Law cards like Eidolon Rhetoric, Archon of Emeria, Deafening Silence, those kind of cards are still there while Rule of Law is pretty good. Most of the time I feel like when I play against Rule of Law, it's not Rule of Law, it's those other cards.
There's so many.
Archon of Emeria, yeah.
Archon of Emeria came out and just... that's the one that it's so brutal. Talk about power creep. But
oh, yeah. No, but I could agree with how powerful that. That's pretty solid. Chrome Mox is a pretty good Magic card, and again, I think that list maybe was like a few years ago. It would be like way more up there. Obviously, we wouldn't have other cards printed and whatnot, but I don't think a tremendous amount. While those cards do see a lot of play, I don't see like Ancient Den in every deck. I'm not seeing those type of cards. Isochron Scepter, Iso Rev is just like not nearly as plays, but still there. It's still a card and everything. But more so, I think the Chrome Mox effect is and Rule of Law are probably the big two components from that specific set.
I think the thing that surprised me the most about it was how many different archetypes come from this specific set with or have important parts to them. Like we said, Isochron Scepter a little iffier now, but it has been just a whole archetype. Yeah. Chalice of the Void, not as archetype defining, but a very unique card. And Proteus Staff. But yeah, and Mirror Retriever with not a wide played card, but a really powerful card in decks like Teshar that can just absolutely break that card in half. For me, I was mostly just surprised how many big ones came from this set. I really don't think it's the most influential, but this is probably the one I found the most surprising. And then if we looked at blocks, Mirrodin block might actually be the most influential block for the entire format. There's just so many things. And also, the block made hit the hardest by Dockside Extortionist, because almost everything in it is an artifact, and those are risky now to play.
Did you by any chance happen to take a look at Onslaught?
Let me check my list. I don't think so.
So we know 5 cards particularly from Onslaught that definitely changes specifically the way the deck's played. It set the stage for the enemy fetch lands.
Yeah.
And I don't think cEDH looks the same without fetch lands at all.
Oh yeah. They have a bigger impact, I think, than the duels. But oh yeah, go ahead, Clay.
Well, another one that I think is worth mentioning as far as very, very influential sets for competitive EDH is New Phyrexia, actually. Thinking specifically your Git Probe, your Dismember, your Noxious Revival specifically. Those cards are
even
particularly good. Yeah, Eleshnorn as a resurrection target. Even Jin Gitaxis has seen play.
Yeah.
So I definitely think that one, as far as honorable mentions go, I definitely think that's a worthy include as well.
I found I was kind of surprised looking at I went through a lot of more modern sets, and it just a lot of them surprised me with how many cards are in them. Also, Strixhaven had more cards than I expected. Partially because it's more of a quality thing than a quantity. And then some of these are just decks that are kind of on the database or are popular. We've got Dina Soulsteeper, Extus, Cody Vociferous Codex, Stormkiln Artist, Archmage Emeritus, Solve the Equation, Wandering Archaic, Resculpt, Culling Ritual, Professor Onyx, which is a little iffier, but Witherbloom Apprentice, and Vanishing Verse, which sees a little bit of play. It can be really powerful when you need it, but it's not the most widely played card.
I think that one being kind of increased in the amount of cards that are relevant there can be summed up in the special rule for that set, Magecraft. Honestly, like this Magecraft being so relevant to what people are doing already in cEDH just makes those effects naturally very good.
Skylar and I talked about recently how Magecraft, they didn't quite break it in half for standard, but it is probably like on the Storm scale, it should probably be like a 10 in terms of its power. Like how easily that effect can be broken, especially in Eternal formats, is incredibly powerful.
It was very well balanced in a limited card pool, but as soon as you start introducing it to Storm, it's just like best friends with Storm.
Yeah. I will say Calling Ritual being probably one of the more unique cards as of late in recent memory because of the fact that it's a board wide. That's also this super ritual. And then again, it plays into the fact that it happens to be black. So it plays into being able to cast post Necropotence, Ad Nauseam, Peer into the Abyss, those type of cards.
Yeah.
And being able to just sculpt your mana too on top of that with like the green and the black. And it's just, that's a pretty uniquely powerful card that I'm glad it exists in the format. It sucks getting it played against me, but when you have access to it,
play. It feels so good to resolve that card.
It's also nice against like some of the low val or the low CMC rule of law and other stacks effects too.
Yeah.
Just having that availability as a sort of a release valve to keep stacks from getting too good, I think is pretty necessary to the format itself.
I agree.
And it's one of those cards where it's kind of like can kind of attacks the format in the way like a Dockside does, where like it's a card that punishes people for doing cEDH stuff and rewards you for doing, like, it rewards you with a ton of mana to power out all this stuff. Like, you do a Culling Ritual into an Ad Nauseam, you are like just so set. You're good to go. Everybody's stuff is gone. You get a ton of mana. Let's go.
Oh yeah, just small little like anecdote here. Like I was playing in a pod a couple of weeks ago. And it was like a turn 2 ritual. Like I was 4th in turn order. I resolved one behind a Veil of Summer, and I got 12 mana off of it. Ended up casting it an Ad Nauseam and was able to manually storm off by twin flaming a Storm Killing Artist by generating all this mana, obviously drawing all these cards and just winning at that point. Like Dockside was obviously irrelevant after the ritual, but it was just so wild to be able to like pay 4 mana and just still be able to win through a storm effect, like with Storm Killing Artist, because obviously it's not relying on that, but just by twin flaming and then casting all these mediocre spells, just doubling up on my treasures. It was so fun. I was like, it's probably the most fun turn 2 I've ever had because it wasn't a Dockside win. Does that make sense? It was just like, yeah, this deck can hang without Dockside. It's pretty cool.
It's such a cool card. Oh yeah, one thing I completely forgot when we had mentioned Stifle effects before. I think that is something that we're gonna see a really busted Stifle effect. I feel like printed sometime in like probably the next year or so, and I think it'll start to change the way we evaluate some cards. But that just feels like the perfect spot to start to power create, and that's something White should be doing a lot more. I
think it needs to be something like a 2 mana modal spell, counter target non-creature spell, counter target triggered or activated ability. Yeah, it's gotta that's where it would be playable. It's gotta be like a negate. Can't be countered, in my opinion. Yeah. Yeah, it'd be pushing it a little too far, but yeah.
They might in that Lord of the Rings set. They're gonna drop something like that. They're gonna be selling them packs. But oh yeah. And it also kind of speaks to how warping Thassa's Oracle is. Whereas, like, you had mentioned that before, where it's hard to interact with. It was like a huge deal for low-color green decks when they got Endurance, so that they had anything they could do about Thassa's Oracle, like to even have a chance to interact with it. And that's how like warping that card has been, where it's like a card is like celebrated to just be like a kind of decent answer to a thing that has you go down in card advantage. But yeah, lots of cool stuff. This is another one where if we had done like hundreds of hours of research, we could have come up with some crazy specific answer that ends up doing it. But I think it's safe to say that I think it's close between 2016 and Theros. I think Theros defines the way we play more probably, and 2016 kind of defines like how we look at cEDH almost, or like its appearance to an extent, and also pushes us towards those high color counts.
I can agree with that. Yeah.
So I have like a sports background, and from playing football and everything like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's like 2016 is like the quarterbacks, and then you got like your wide receiver and your tight end from Theros, and without those two components, your offense won't work.
Yeah.
And they have to feed off each other. And yes, like Thassa's Oracle and Underworld Breach would still be they would obviously be very, very good because, Orville doesn't need Thassa's Oracle. Like, it just still does its thing. Or any, like, Turbo Red Black Nas base list. But then on top of that, when you have the access to the blue and the white, especially when you pair, like, again, this is why I really think that, like, Tymna Crom is like if there was an arbitrary best deck in the format, it's probably this or Krark Sakashima, but it attacks the format on a different axis.
Yeah.
But in terms of just doing good stuff things, because of the addition of the access to the white and having stuff like Grand Abolisher and or silence effects, it does allow your wheel effects to be hyper effective. And that's the one thing I was going to mention about wheels. If you look at the like low color red decks that don't play white and they still play wheel, that's just what they really have. But when you look at like these decks with wheels, they're probably paired with white a lot of the times because, and like Kess does wheel things and whatnot. But when you look at like Mad Farm, like the Jessica Tymna style list, or if you want to go Dargo, whatever, been able to cast that behind a silence, a Grand Abolisher, or any of those, or whatever the backside of like Flame Scroll Celebrant is, or whatever, whatever those type of effects are, it's pretty wild, and that allows you to kind of do the thing like that. But yeah, it's just tough because I'm just imagining. I would like to. It would be kind of interesting to see what the format would look like without those particular commanders. But it would just be kind of hard to, juxtapose and just remove those from the game at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard to see I think it can be easier to imagine the development of cEDH without Theros because we're like, we're sort of a lot closer to it than like cEDH popularized post Commander 2016. Like that's when it kind of became a thing, and Commander itself, I think as well. Like we didn't see it become like Commander didn't become like the format of Magic until like 2020-ish almost, or 2019, like around when they decided to kill Standard with Throne of Eldraine and War of the Spark and all that. But yeah, and it's a little harder to see, but like yeah, I think they both define it in their own ways, and Alpha Beta is there in its own boring way, and Commander Legends is I think is another that got to be like a top 5 one that as we've gone on we've I think reevaluated more of that set. Where like Armix wasn't even looked at really until like within the last year, and then Armix Crom kind of exploded as this big hot new thing, and then now it's not. But there's just like as different things come out, we've go back to that set and we see like, oh, turns out the Commander focus set was good for Commander. And Jessica's will.
What you're saying is the D&D set's going to do the same thing, right?
No,
I honestly don't think so. Like there are Commander Legends 2 had some cool cards, but nothing that like really was on the power level. That I am a huge fan of Gale Waterdeep Prodigy, though. I will say that card is amazing.
To me, that I had mentioned this to somebody like a day or two ago. If you think about that set like a Commander Legends set, it's pretty disappointing. If you think about that set as Wizards making a core set for Commander, it makes a lot more sense. And I think that's that's kind of, you're not gonna see core sets for standard. I mean, spoiler alert, I don't think we should see as many standard sets probably, because they don't. I don't know, that standard and commander is weird. I have a video on that. I'll link it up here probably. But yeah, I think that was what they were doing, but the marketing went with Commander Legends and D&D. It's like a mishmash of all these different things, and for some people that really worked, and for some people it really didn't. I looked at it, didn't see really any commanders that excited me to build, and then that was my thing. It didn't have to be powerful, but like you said, Gale is one that gets to play a really unique kind of way, and you can do it in good colors with its background. But yeah, I'm gonna guess that one doesn't end up super influential going forward.
Probably not.
You don't think Wilson's going to take over the format, you know?
I don't. I trashed Wilson in my last video, specifically.
Hey, Wilson with the blue background. Listen, you can draw your deck with food chain. Don't be hating on Wilson.
I did actually.
That bear is a refined bear, okay?
I looked at that and I was just... recently, because I think Play to Win had a video where they played that with the food chain Wilson. I was just like, this is cool, but why not just use Uro? Uro does like the same thing as one card.
It's a bear. It's a bear. It's so the meme is great.
It is really it is cool though.
I will say though, the set did give us the new, I think it's like a white Rolgurger Dragon effect, essentially.
Yeah, Abdel Adrian is really sick. Yeah, I'm a big fan.
That card.
Yeah, there'll be like a couple things that stand out, but yeah, for me, I do think it is more of a like, hey, Commander is the way we play this game now. Here's a good way to get into Commander. And I think it's like a perfect set for that. Like it's pushes low color, the complexity isn't too crazy, but arguably probably still a little high for new people, but like the power level is at a good point for that. And we just didn't get any Jeweled Lotuses or Hull Breachers or anything like that this time.
Yeah, for me, in terms of just set building, the biggest miss was not putting Dockside Extortionist in that set, honestly. Because you could have easily still had Double Masters, and that set's pretty juiced up. You could just add another powerful, expensive card in there, and then had Dockside, because now everybody that's, not just buying singles, they feel like, I can buy a box and pull a Dockside. Like, it's that big chase card. And that set, I don't have that card. I'm like, there's nothing I'm like, I really want to open that particular one. Now, the supplemental products, the Commander decks, the black-white one, great Commander deck.
Yeah.
That deck was pretty powerful for a pre-built Commander deck. So they're doing better with those at least.
I do think that kind of confirm like that specifically those two sets back to back with Commander Legends, Baldur's Gate, and Double Masters. To me, that showed Wizards absolutely showing that they know Commander is the format, and that is where they're looking to get money from. Because, like I said, that was basically a core set in Commander form, and we've done away with core sets. And then most of the big chase cards for the big reprint set is Commander staples, or big Commander cards that people are chasing. Like I said, Dockside, throw it in there. A lot of the Eldrazi Titans, stuff like that.
Imperial
big
Seal.
Cards for Commander. Yeah, Imperial Seal. Not really getting played much anywhere by everybody, by a lot of people in popular formats. But Commander players need it really bad. And I think that one. And then also just look at how many freaking legendary we get literally 10 times the amount of legendary creatures now. It's not coincidence. But
it's going to be interesting to see when we get through Dominaria, and the one I'm very much looking forward to is the Brothers War, being a heavy artifact based set. We obviously know artifacts are inherently powerful, and again, it doesn't have to be like some just albatross ridiculous card that you look at. It could be something as simple as an Esper Sentinel.
Yeah,
and we've talked about how Esper Sentinel, how powerful that card is on its own, but just something that is a one-mana artifact, has utility, attacks with Temna, provides your Mox Opal, with that additional benefit without even trying. Like this card's like doing it on its own without it, building around it.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm really looking to see if that set has at least 10 cards probably that's going to be in cEDH, especially.
I'm really interested to see because historically artifact sets and blocks are, like we mentioned, in this thing we talked about Urza's block and Mirrodin block and how they're two of the most powerful blocks in history.
Mirrodin block, really.
Yeah. And we haven't seen an artifact set in in a post-fire design world. And I am curious to see what that looks like. And
was Kaladesh not?
That I believe was right before at least that they made the big announcement about fire design. Probably those philosophies were there, but at least the public facing way, I believe at least that was before them. And just the power creep since Kaladesh is, even since then, it's been kind of wild. Or complexity creep in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
In a Magic Arena, you have to scroll to read the cards now, which is pretty awesome. But yeah, any closing remarks, other sets you guys want to throw out, anything like that before we send it off?
I think that's all for me. I can't think of anything else. I know a lot of people say Ice Age. I don't know why they say Ice Age.
I saw someone say that, but I hadn't even looked at Ice Age. I didn't know if that was just a meme argument or if it was real, because I'm not super familiar with that set, and I know there's good stuff from it, but maybe it's Ice Age. Tell us in the comments why it's Ice Age.
Just off the top of my head, Necro. What else?
The Snowlands you play, but that seems weird.
Yeah, they don't really define much.
Yeah, maybe I'm probably just missing something because I'm playing with a different print of another card, but.
And it's also I found going over this, it was kind of tough to, because you don't think about often what set a card originally came out from, especially when it's not within the last couple years. It's a lot of the cards we talked about today have been reprinted like crazy, or were never reprinted.
Demonic Consultation, probably.
Oh yeah. So that and Necropotence were in the same set?
Yeah.
Okay.
Necropotence,
yeah, that's pretty big.
Brainstorm.
Yeah.
Trying to see what else.
Brainstorm's good. It doesn't see play in every blue deck, though.
Yeah.
In terms of legacy format, sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
We have Brainstorm. Brainstorm is, gold standard, but.
Hydroblast, Fireblast, or Pyroblast and Hydroblast, excuse me.
Okay, yeah.
So yeah, there's certainly a case, but I don't think it has a better argument than Alpha, to be honest.
Those are new versions of Alpha cards plus.
Console,
no console things are different, and then historically, no Necropotence changes the way cEDH looks a lot. You don't see decks like Zur even be a thing, but today Necro isn't as big of a thing. But yeah, even without even if you ban console, Thassa's Tainted Pact is still not the, because the only other
you can get there with Brain Freeze too. It doesn't change a whole lot.
Yeah. Yeah, that one does have good cards, but yeah, I don't see it having an argument. I think it's fun to look at some of these sets and just see it's had 5, 10, whatever cards, but yeah, I think we kind of got around to the biggest ones. If there's any that we missed that seem egregious, just let me know. I am not an expert on especially older sets. I am younger than Magic is, so I'm not. I wasn't there. I know.
I'm only a little older than Magic is, so it's okay.
Yeah. So do you guys like to plug yourselves where people can find you, stuff you're gonna be working on? Claire?
So we're actually currently in the process of getting a new editor. So with Who Brewed This. So it's Who Brewed This on YouTube. We've got 3 videos up already. CEDH content, of course, with like really insightful commentary. I do that with Pedro Cicada and Scoots. My on Twitter is Anxiety Elemental with an 8, so it's like ANXI 8I and then Elemental. So hit me up there if you want to talk to me about Magic or stuff like that. But yeah, that is where I can be found on the internet, and I guest on a lot of streams, so you may see me on like moderately anonymous MTG a lot. Play on there maybe once or twice a month sometimes. So.
Heck yeah.
All right, well, yo, you know me, I'm never on the internet hardly at all, but I always like or respond on Twitter, so it's the Eric Taylor. All things Corvold. Actually, probably the easiest way would be to just contact me in Discord. So if I'm not in the competitive Discord or the database Discord, a Corvold ad nauseum, the Malcolm. Even the Protean Hulk Discord or Kadama or something like that. But probably the easiest way to get a hold of me would be that or Twitter. So,
all right. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys for coming on. It was a lot of fun to get to talk about this.
Thank you so much.
I'm sure we
thanks
covered
for having us.
everything with perfect detail. And we got nothing wrong, so no need to comment about any of that. And yeah, thank you guys for watching. Did we miss something? Commander 2016 overrated? Commander Legends overrated? Let us know. Maybe it's Ice Age. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.